Hello everyone, how are we doing today? So today we're going into the last video on chapter 5. So chapter 5 has been all about these basic extensions of inheritance and these modifications on how not everything is, round pea and, wrinkled pea or green pea, yellow pea. It gets a little bit more complex, and we take that one step forward today, and today we're going to be going over environmental effects. So environmental effects meaning things you bring into you affect your phenotype outside of what your genes say it should be. So the first example here for these environmental effects are these gene-environment interactions. So these are when environmental conditions affect the expression of genes. So this kind of starts us into the whole nature versus nurture thing. We're going to get into that a little bit more later. And talking about twin studies and adoption studies next chapter. But here, there is a combination of, think about skin color. Your skin is a basal color, but then environment-wise, you go out into the sun, your skin can get darker or more tan. So your genotype says what your skin color should be, but then your phenotype might not be directly matching what your genotype says. So that's just a quick little example of how the environment could affect your phenotype. So both then combine to determine it, and that can make understanding what a person's genes actually are a little bit more complex, and you can't forget about it when looking at this. So let's look at an example of plant height here. So plants depend on nutrients or water availability. So here plant height is on the y-axis, and here environment is then down here from dry to wet. So let's say we have a recessive and a dominant plant here. So this dominant plant grows that tall, this recessive plant grows that tall. So the dominant plant grows taller than the recessive one, which, if this was the normal growing environment, would make sense. So taller plant, shorter plant is recessive. But if we go down to a wet environment, in the wet environment, the dry plant actually thrives, or not the dry plant, the recessive plant thrives more than the wet plant. So you see a difference in height here. So the recessive version can be taller, and the dominant version is actually shorter. So if you're asked what's the genotype of these plants, and you weren't given the genotypes, you would probably guess wrong based on this information here. So the environment does affect this. And some other examples, think about weight. That also comes down to nutrient availability. So of humus, the more you eat, the larger you get. So increased rates of obesity and things like that. Whereas if you don't eat as much, you won't be as large. And that does come. There is a big play in genetics for obesity and weight, of course, but the environment of what you bring into your body also plays a big role in weight as well. Okay, so that's nutrient availability, weight and plant height and things like that. Another example I wanted to mention here about these environmental things are these Himalayan rabbits. So these are temperature dependent. So for these Himalayan rabbits, we're looking at fur color. So if you notice this little prize award-winning royalty-free rabbit I found here, it has white fur on most of the body and black fur on the extremities. So what's one unique thing about the extremities? Extremities are lower in temp. So that lower temperature causes black pigment to be produced. Whereas areas where we have a higher temperature that produces or maybe doesn't produce the melanin in those hair follicles, so that hair is white. So very, very interesting here. So an example that's sometimes used is, what if you put, a cold compress pack on this rabbit for a long period of time and keep changing it, you'd actually end up making, so let's say, this was on there for, a good amount of time, that patch would become, you could make a black patch on that rabbit's fur. And, these rabbits have developed this because, Himalayan rabbits living in, snowy, rocky environments, they can blend in better with their surroundings with these black spots mimicking little rocks and things like that, and the snow with the white. So if these rabbits grew up in a very, very warm temperature, there'd be a less chance of having black tips on the extremities. So the rabbit would be a little bit more warm there as well. So these Himalayan rabbits are a cool example of how this temperature. So this rabbit has the same genotype. So maybe the genotype for fur color, is homozygous dominant. This rabbit would be homozygous dominant for this fur color. Very simple example here. However, if you look at the ears, you might say, oh, that's recessive or something like that. So little different. Just wanted to make a little reminder here about how temperature can also affect this as well. Okay, so those are the environmental effects there. So gene and environment. Now there are some other different environmental effects that could happen here on different definitions. This one we're going to talk about now is called phenocopy. Think of it as copying the phenotype. So the environmental factor alone, so just the environmental factor, produces a phenotype that is the same as the phenotype encoded by a different genotype. I know a lot of type words in there. Okay, so let's go through that again. It produces a phenotype, so that's what you see, that is the same phenotype of a different genotype. The same phenotype of a different genotype. So, think about that. This could be an example right here. So produces the same, so if dominant was supposed to be taller, this recessive one produces the same phenotype as a different genotype. Just both grew taller in that other environment. Now, this one wouldn't be exact because in that wet environment, both are slightly taller. It's just the recessive one becomes more tall. Okay, the example I'm going to use for this one now is the Drosophila, fruit fly body color. So here, wild type is brown or gray. So here we have a brown gray Drosophila. Again, this one is the wild type version. And the mutant is the yellow version right here. So this is the mutant fly. This is the wild type fly. Now, phenocopy is when the environmental factor. So here the environmental factor is nutrient based. So when this brown fly, this brown gray fly, is fed something called silver salts. So this brown fly is fed silver salts. It actually becomes a yellow fly as adult. So at the larva stage, if it's fed these silver salts and its nutrients, it actually becomes a yellow fly. But this fly is, homozygous dominant or heterozygous. But its phenotype, because of what it's fed, is yellow, where this one should be homozygous recessive. So there you want to be able to tell the difference, and it comes down to nutrition. So that's called phenocopy. And sometimes you do see that in these environmental things. So again, a brown-gray wild-type larva fed silver salts shows yellow phenotype. So kind of neat there. And then last thing I wanted to mention here to finish up this chapter are these things called multifactorial traits. So multifactorial traits. Lots of things lead into the final phenotype. So it's complex. It's not a simple one-to-one idea on how something's inherited. So the character determined by environmental effects and many genes. So now we're looking at something that's polygenic and also environmental. So examples here are height, weight, behavior, skin color, etc. All of these have, not only multiple genes that determine what the output is, but then also environmental effects also play a major role. Like, I talked about skin color and, weight. What you eat and how much you're in the sun affects that phenotype drastically. So you don't know the true phenotype unless, that stuff is controlled and regulated, which, we're humans. We're not going to control and regulate that just to know what our true phenotype is. But yeah, but then they also get more complex because of the polygenic nature of those traits as well. But yeah, a little video to end this chapter 5 here, going over the different environmental effects of how, this can get one more layer of complexity. Next chapter, we're going into chapter 6, which is on pedigree analysis. And so if we're talking about Drosophila, mice, plant height up until now, we've hinted at a few disorders and things like that. So how do we do human genetic studies? We look at things called pedigree charts and look at family history. You can't really do, mating events ethically to test genetics like you do in fruit flies. You can't do a test cross in humans. So we're going to go over how we study human genetics. We're going to go over a little bit about pedigree analysis, twin studies, adoption studies, and also genetic counseling and genetic testing for humans. So that's chapter 6. I hope you enjoyed chapter 5. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to me and let me know. But if not, hope you all have a great day. and see you next time. Bye-bye.